Have you ever finished a painting and thought, it's fine, but it's missing something? So you're looking at it, the drawing is solid, the colors are working, but it just doesn't sing or breathe or feel alive. And you just can't quite put your finger on why. More often than not, the missing piece isn't necessarily the subject or the level of realism or the amount of detail. More often than not, it's actually the background. A stiff, overworked background can really flatten a painting, making it feel static and lifeless. But a background with loose, expressive brushwork, well, if that's your jam, it's where the magic happens. It can really elevate your entire portrait, adding energy, movement, and cohesion without pulling focus away from your subject. But here's the tricky part. How do you create a background that feels dynamic without it becoming a distracting mess? A lot of painters think that the answer is just loosen up or be bold with your brushwork. After all, this should come intuitively, right? And while confidence is important here, the truth is, expressive painterly brushwork doesn't come from just forcing yourself to paint fast or messy. It comes from having a really intentional plan that actually supports loose, elegant, painterly mark making. And that's what I'm going to walk you through today. A simple process that takes the guesswork out of backgrounds so you can paint with more confidence and expression. So by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how to use a vision board to plan backgrounds that enhance rather than competing with your subject, how to create a mock-up so you're not making last-minute decisions while painting. And if you struggle on how to execute certain kind of brush strokes or background effects, I'll share a way to practice your brushwork separately before applying it to your portrait. That way, you're not painting by the seat of your pants. And if you're feeling stuck and you want a full roadmap for creating a cohesive body of work in your goal painting style and your unique voice as an artist, I've got an on-demand webinar that walks you through the entire process that I'm going to be going through today in even more detail. You can watch it now or right after this video. Just check out the link in the description. So if you've ever struggled with backgrounds that feel too tight or chaotic, or they just don't work, stay with me. All right, so we need to begin by actually getting a really clear vision for what your backgrounds ideally look like. So before picking up a brush, we need to gather inspiration. And the way that I like to do this is through actually having a visual inspiration board to show me where I'm headed. I like doing this using something like Pinterest, as it's a really great way for me to be able to compile all of the kind of work that I like so I can see at a glance what these things actually have in common. I actually have an entire YouTube video walking you through step by step how to create a vision board that shows you what your unique voice is and where you're heading with your work. So if you are interested in that, or you think that it would be helpful, or you're just struggling to find your voice, check out the link that I'm going to post up in the upper right-hand corner of this video and watch that video next, because it's going to walk you through this really crucial step in depth. But the short version of this is that it's really difficult to know where you're headed with your work if you don't know what kind of looseness you're actually drawn to. If you watched the video that I shared last week where I talk about the different styles of looseness, you'll know exactly why this is so important, because there isn't just one way of painting expressively. You might be wondering, okay, that's great, but how do I know which one to choose? Well, that's the beauty of this particular tool, this exercise that I'm sharing with you. If you check out the YouTube video that I mentioned, it's going to walk you through how to start with your overall taste. So basically all the kinds of artwork that you are drawn to, and it filters it down to exactly the kind of work that resonates for you and that you would most enjoy making. This is your artistic voice, the kind of work that you would enjoy making, be proud to make, and be really energized to make over and over again. So after I followed the steps in the YouTube video that I mentioned, here is what I came up with. This is a curated down vision board for my inspiration. And what you might notice taking a look at this board is it's pretty darn cohesive. And I will explain why. So first things first, what we see on this board over and over are portraits. Specifically, I'm looking at Head and Shoulders vignettes. So there are no full figure pieces, no like head to toe figurative paintings in here. There aren't really paintings that feature a full background where there's a lot of objects in there competing with the subject. In fact, this is pretty honestly narrow. It's pretty niched down as far as art styles go. What I see, having completed this exercise, is that the artwork that I'm drawn to has a lot of bare canvas in the background. The backgrounds are often very light in value and a pretty neutral color. So there's a lot of browns, grays, and whites in the background here. Additionally, these are all portraits. They typically crop somewhere at about the shoulder level, and the background is basically just painterly brushwork. It's not getting into a ton of detail. And so what's great about this is that it shows me so much of what I shouldn't be doing. Now, when you put together a vision board like this, you should be able to draw similar conclusions, but tailored to yourself. So your taste, your personality, your artistic voice. It should tell you a lot about what subjects you should be painting, what kind of colors or lighting you're drawn to, what kind of brushwork resonates, and how to compose all of this on the canvas. So if you want help setting up your vision board so you can proceed forward with a really clear vision of where you're headed, make sure to check out that link above to my other YouTube video where I walk you through this start to finish. But if this step makes sense and you're ready to go ahead and dive into step 2, well, let's get to it. Once you have this really clear vision of where you're headed, the next step is to go ahead and plan the individual painting that you want to make. That is what I'm going to be focusing on for the bulk of today's video because this step is an absolute game changer. Most painters make the mistake of figuring out their background while they're painting, which leads to guesswork, hesitation, and then overworking because ultimately you're testing things out, you're trying them, and not all of them work. So you have to paint and repaint and repaint. And in the process, your painting gets really overworked. It becomes this really muddy mess. So instead, I recommend that you take the step of creating a mock-up to actually test out the composition, the color, the mark making, etc. That is actually what I did for this particular painting. This was a demo that I was asked to share with Portrait Society of America this past month. What I did to actually create this painting was that I started with this digital mock-up. When I put these side by side, you can see that my mock-up showed me exactly what I wanted the final piece to look like. Now, what's really cool about this is if I go back over to my Pinterest board, I actually put the image of this mock-up on my Pinterest board and realize that it just looks like it fits on the board. What that actually tells me is that my plan for this painting really aligns with my taste and my style and where I want to go. Essentially, I can use this mock-up at this stage of the journey to make sure that I'm going to like the final product. It's going to be a fit for my voice, my taste, and what I want to be known for. Now, if I had created this mock-up, put it on the board, and it stuck out with a sore thumb, that would probably tell me that something about my plan needs to change. And if I didn't start with a mock-up at all, well, I would really be throwing caution to the wind and opening myself up to a very real and very likely possibility that I would just be going in a random direction that didn't actually align with this inspiration board that I put together. But because I actually took the step of creating the mock-up, I can see that this genuinely is a fit for where I want to go. Let's go ahead and walk through what this mock-up process looks like for a new piece. So here I have a plan for a painting that I recently put together, and I'm going to reverse engineer exactly how I created this. All right, so here on the left, I have a reference photo that I took of a friend of mine who was gracious enough to pose for this particular portrait. In case you're curious, this bar on the left is literally just because I accidentally cropped it in too much. So the very first step that I actually took was to go ahead and plan what the cropping of this image should be based on the size of my final canvas. I free-handed this crop and then realized that I cropped it in a little bit too narrow compared to the 9x12 panel that I had. So the first thing that I actually did to correct this was to take the crop tool and set it to 9x12 and then just make sure that I positioned her roughly in this 9x12 canvas the way that I would like for her to appear in the final painting. So right now there's this big red bar, but I'm going to fix that in later steps. The next thing that I went ahead and did was I knew I was going to replace this background and create more of a vignetting effect where I focused in on her face. So in order to actually accomplish this, I needed to go ahead and select her and remove her from the background. So using something like Photoshop, the easiest way to do this is to go up to select and then say select subject. And then it actually creates this selection of just the subject. And I can go ahead and copy and paste this onto its own layer. And that is what I did. And this is what this looked like when I actually did that paste. So I'll go ahead and reverse engineer this for you really quickly. So technically, this is what that looks like to start with. And then what I did was I just took my eraser tool. I set it to a relatively low opacity. So I had the size about here, and then I set the opacity of 38%, and I literally just went through and I started erasing out this kind of overall V shape that I wanted. And I did this until I got to this end result. Now this had kind of the overall compositional flow that I wanted for this final image. I kind of had the sense that I wanted this V shape coming down from her neck, just because I saw that quite a bit on this board. But some of it is also just coming from my experience. I've created a lot of vignetted portraits by now, so some of it happens through intuition. But when in doubt, I like to actually look at my board and ask, how are painters on my inspiration board solving a similar compositional problem? What worked for them that I really resonate with so that I can go ahead and take that same solution and apply it to my particular painting? So in order to visualize this a little bit further, because right now it's just a floating head on an empty background, I went ahead and I actually grabbed an image of a painting I've made before that has a very similar composition. Specifically, it was this one. So you can see the composition is very similar. It is a pretty straight-on view of the portrait, and then it's almost like the paint drips down from the subject. I went ahead and copied this and I pasted this in to that empty background. And so already I'm getting a much clearer picture of how this relates to where I want to go with this particular piece. And I can start to see the relationship between this mock-up and my background. Now, the only thing that's really left in this image is that I don't actually have a background established for the upper piece here. And just really quickly, I'm going to give you a glimpse of what this looks like without the subject right now. So I literally just copied over this particular image. I pasted it in to this document and I pasted it under the image of her. And then I erased out sections of this that just were distracting. So here's what that would look like if I went ahead and did that from scratch. So I've gone ahead and pasted this in. And right now you can see these really don't line up. So I went ahead and said edit and then free transform. And then I'm just zooming out so I can see the edge of this image and I'm just make it so that it fits on the canvas. So this is where this is right now. And what I realized when I took a look at this was this wasn't quite what I actually wanted. I didn't want this dark area above the top of her head. So what I went ahead and did was I erased out the top of this other image so that it would feel a little bit more like what I have on my inspiration board. And then the only kind of remaining step was for me to fill in this blank area above her head. And I just used the clone stamp tool in Photoshop to go ahead and just sample areas of the rest of the canvas and fill it in on the top. And with that, I had a pretty solid plan and felt ready to paint. And I was able to go from something that had a similar composition, but it didn't quite match the aesthetic of what I'm moving toward, all the way to a plan where I felt like this would be genuinely foolproof. I knew I could get to the end result that I really wanted. And I could just sit down at the easel and think about translating this onto canvas rather than also juggling a lot of compositional decision-making at the same time. Now, I've just shown you how to do this using Photoshop, but the truth is you don't need to use digital tools to do this if that isn't in your comfort zone. When I work together with artists to help them accomplish a body of work that they're proud of in their unique style of loose painting, a good half of them would prefer not to use Photoshop and have never even used it before, and that is absolutely no problem. So I want to share a quick example of a painting where I actually chose not to use a digital approach. So here is that particular painting, and really quickly, I want to share the digital mock-up that I got for this piece. When I put this together, I'll be honest, I wasn't really thrilled with it. I just couldn't actually get to an end product where I was like, yeah, this shows me exactly what I want to do. So instead, I took the basic idea that I was going for and I translated this onto a very small canvas. I didn't focus on any of the detail in the face. I wasn't overly concerned with brushwork. I just wanted to look at color and where I would actually design the marks to go down. So essentially, I just wanted to know where I would put certain shapes of color to create the kind of composition that I ultimately wanted. Now, I happened to land on a mock-up that I really liked on my first try. But what I had planned to do, and what I would recommend that you plan to do, is go ahead and just get like a scrap piece of linen or go ahead and practice painting on paper and just grid it off into a bunch of small studies at this size or smaller, all next to one another, where you test out different compositions, different colors, different ideas for the piece. And then go off the one that visually resonates the most for you. So when I went ahead and created this final product, I ultimately based it off of this mockup versus a digital mockup, and you can absolutely do the same. The idea is that you really want to remove all the uncertainty so that when you're actually sitting down to paint, you feel really emboldened to create the bold brushwork that you're genuinely interested in, and you can get your brush strokes right from the start. No overworking. Now, if you have your mock-up ready to go, whether it's digital or it's traditional, analog, you see the areas of brushwork you're looking to achieve, but you're not quite sure how to achieve them, don't experiment directly on your final painting. Practice this separately first. This is a step that I see a lot of painters skip, and I get it because I'm tempted to skip this step too, but it's often the reason that we wind up struggling with our backgrounds. So instead, take an additional step after you've completed your mock-up and treat this little exercise as a warm-up for your final painting. And here's what you're going to go ahead and focus on in this particular step. So let's go ahead and take a look at my vision board again, my inspiration board for where I want to take my work. Let's say that I'm really drawn to this particular piece. This piece is by Henri Guldelin, and I just love the mark making in here. But I can tell this mark making is like you put it down once and you don't touch it. So if I wanted to take this piece and have it inspire the brushwork that I put into my particular painting, what I would do is a warm-up painting where my objective would be to actually practice making these specific kind of marks. Now, I'm not trying to replicate his entire painting. I'm not trying to get the likeness. I'm not even trying to match the color or the value. All I'm trying to do is experiment with my tools, so my brushes, my paint, the medium I'm using, the surface I'm painting on, the way I'm using that brush and loading the paint onto it, to see if I can capture some of this same kind of mark making confidently. If I can do that, I should be able to essentially paint with my mock-up next to my blank canvas, my second canvas where I've maybe done my brushwork test next to that, and I should be able to look at the two of them and essentially know exactly how I'm going to take this piece all the way to the final version. Some things to keep in mind while you do this exercise: consider whether or not you're working wet into wet and what the texture of your paint really has to be. So one common thing that I find is very often painters who are looking to loosen up their oil work are painting with their paint too dry. The surface of the canvas is too dry and the paint that they're working with winds up being too stiff. So what we can do in that situation is to very intentionally practice working wet into wet. You can also experiment with different brush sizes, different ways of holding the brush, different angles, different amounts of pressure, and of course, different brushes themselves. You can also use palette knives or unconventional tools to add some texture as well. The goal here is to train your hands to make these marks automatically so that they will happen just intuitively when you look at your mock-up and you think about how to translate that onto canvas. Today, I'm just explaining this exercise, but if you would like to see a full start to finish demonstration of how I would put this to use for myself, let me know in the comments and I'll create a dedicated video just on this exercise. All right, now that I've walked you through those 3 steps, let's go ahead and recap. So first things first, if you want to loosen up your work and get more energy into your backgrounds and create more of a dynamic composition, we have to start by understanding what that means for you. And the best way I found to do this is to go ahead and create a vision board to understand your inspiration, your taste, and where your style is taking you. Next, go ahead and create a mock-up to remove any of the guesswork. You can even put that mock-up on your vision board in order to double check that it really stylistically aligns with where you're headed. But once this is done, the guesswork should be removed. And finally, if you really like the plan but you're not quite sure how to get the specific brushwork you're seeing, go ahead and practice your brushwork separately so that you feel confident applying it to your painting. Now, I want to hear from you. What has been your biggest struggle when it comes to backgrounds? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you would like to see me demo the brushwork exercise that I describe here, let me know in the comments as well. And if this process resonates with you and you want a full roadmap for creating a cohesive body of work in your unique artistic voice, I walk you through exactly how to do that in my on-demand webinar. So make sure to check out the link to that below in the description. It's a full hour, it goes really in depth, and I think that if you enjoyed this video, you're gonna really get a lot out of that one. You can watch it right now. Just go ahead and click the link in the description. That's it for today. I hope this video has been really helpful, and until next time, happy painting.